So if that goes up 10%, that's 0.3 cents. I just paid $1.49 for this can of Coke. It doesn't mean anything. So all this hysteria is a lot to do about nothing.
Joining me now, member of the Foreign Relations Committee, Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware. Senator, thanks very much for being here tonight. It's nice to see you.
Thank you, Kasie. I hope you're not going to ask me to try and explain what it was exactly that Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross was trying to say in that clip.
You don't have a can of Coke to hand. That's too bad. Senator, I do want to start, though, with those tariffs. There has been quite the worldwide response, both from countries like China, but also close allies of the United States, including Canada. What is your view of the president's decision in this regard? Was this a good idea?
Frankly, the president didn't do his homework on this one. And this is what happens when you take a bumper sticker level attack on the world trading system that might stir up election rallies, but is terrible policy, and throw it out there without having done enough groundwork with our allies, with industry, and with our partners around the world. The tariffs that the president's threatening to slap onto imported steel and aluminum will principally affect some of our core and vital allies, Canada, South Korea, some of our European allies, rather than principally affecting China, which is the country he says he's been trying to get their attention on trade issues. I think, for example, rather than withdrawing from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, if the president really wants to strengthen our hand in the world in terms of trade, getting back to the table and negotiating a strong, tough, fair deal with our partners in the Asia-Pacific against China would make a lot more sense. So I frankly think that our allies weren't well prepared for it. The markets took a dive in response to it. And it's not yet clear to me what exactly the president's goal is in slapping tariffs on steel and aluminum, principally imported from key allies.
Still, I mean, this is something that the president ran on, and there are some members of your party, people like Joe Manchin of West Virginia, Sherrod Brown of Ohio, who've suggested that this could be good policy, and that essentially those who, in both parties, Republican and Democrat, who have supported free trade policies have essentially left behind the middle of America. What do you say to them?
There are folks in both parties who've called on the president to impose restrictions on our competitors, whether it's by punishing China for currency manipulation or going after China and others for stealing our intellectual property. This particular move, putting tariffs on imported steel and aluminum, is popular with folks in states where there is still a steel-making industry that faces significant foreign pressure. And so this isn't some out of the blue move by the president. He did run on this. He's talked about it repeatedly. What I'm trying to suggest by saying that he didn't fully do his homework was that there's reporting that folks within the White House, within his own administration, and in some of our key allies, capitals around the world, who were utterly unprepared for this announcement. It was the way it was announced and the likely impact it will have that I think doesn't really align with our best economic interests.
Let's switch gears. I want to ask you about the Russia investigation as well as Russian meddling in our past and future elections. Denis McDonough, President Obama's chief of staff, spoke to Chuck Todd on Meet the Press earlier today. Let's take a look, and then I want to ask you about it.
The president asked the four leaders in a bipartisan meeting in the Oval Office to join him in asking the states to work with us on this question. It took over 3 weeks to get that statement worked out. It was dramatically watered down. You can ask Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi, even the speaker.
And it was watered down on the insistence of Mitch McConnell?
Yes.
And nobody else?
Yes.
Senator, what knowledge do you have of how that came to be? Did Mitch McConnell water down the letter? And do you think that President Obama did enough to warn the country ahead of the 2016 election?
Well, Kasie, I have no direct knowledge of what Denis McDonough is relating there. I wasn't involved in the conversations with the Speaker and the Majority Leader and the Minority Leader in the House and the Senate about warning the American public around 2016 meddling. I do think the Obama administration tried to strike the right balance between being forceful and confronting Putin personally in the case of President Obama and engaging Congress just a few short weeks before a general election and trying to avoid seeming partisan. The larger question is whether we've done enough to protect our election that's upcoming here in just a few months in 2018. And the answer clearly is that we haven't. There's reporting out in the New York Times today that out of a fund of $120 million that was appropriated to the State Department to allow them to combat meddling in elections, election interference, none of it, zero, has been spent so far. And although I've joined a bipartisan bill, a good bipartisan bill that Senator Langford, Senator Klobuchar, and several other senators have called the Secure Elections Act, we don't yet have a pathway towards getting that bill passed. As an appropriator, I'm working on a bipartisan basis to try and get grants out to the states in time. But it is a Republican-controlled Congress, and I'll tell you my concern is that we are not doing enough bipartisan work to get this done and get this done in a timely way to protect us for the 2018 elections.
I'm glad you raised that New York Times report. I was actually going to ask you about it. And I'm wondering, do you plan to ask questions of Rex Tillerson, or can your committee do anything to try and get to the bottom of why exactly none of this money that's been authorized has actually been spent?
Absolutely. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee has an upcoming scheduled hearing with Secretary of State Tillerson. It is striking to me that after the Senate, by a vote of 98-2, authorized the president to use new sanctions authority to push back on Russia, to punish Russia for interfering in our 2016 election. To my estimation, not enough has been done yet. And this new reporting today that this dedicated fund has not been utilized strikes me as just a dereliction of duty by the State Department and by the Trump administration. We can and should do more on a bipartisan basis. I'm working as an appropriator, as a senator with Republican colleagues to try and tackle this problem, but time is really running out. And very recently in the House Intelligence Committee, we heard testimony from President Trump's own CIA director, national security advisor, and director of national intelligence that they believe the Russians will attempt to interfere in our next election. They've interfered in democratic elections across Western Europe. And so the time is long past due for us to step forward and take action. And I intend to press Secretary Tillerson on why this fund has not been appropriately used by the State Department.
Senator, before I let you go, March 5th was supposed to be the deadline to find a fix for kids who are here under the DACA program. At this point, do you think there's any scenario where Congress acts on this topic before the end of the year?
Well, there's two topics I think we need to address in a bipartisan way, tackling gun violence and addressing immigration and the status of Dreamers. I was bitterly disappointed that a strong bipartisan bill that would have solved the status of Dreamers was rejected. It got 54 votes because of the president's change in position and active lobbying against it. Until we know that the president will support some solution on Dreamers, I have a hard time seeing how we're going to get it back on the floor and get it done in time this year.
Senator Chris Coons, with that rosy assessment, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you, Kasie.